to interview Mr. Knotts for the Veterans History Project. Mr. Knotts served honorably as a career officer in the United States Air Force for 24 years. This included duty in Vietnam, where he flew 112 combat missions. Mr. Knotts rose to the rank of colonel before retiring in 1984. Since then, he has served the community with a numerous variety of volunteer assignments. Mr. Knotts, on behalf of the Conejo Valley chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, it is my honor to interview you today. Our videographer is Mr. Edmund. Jerry, where and when were you born?
Born in Sharon, Pennsylvania on 4 January 1938.
Did you grow up there?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about your family, your mother and your father and brothers and sisters that you might have had that you grew up with.
My mother died whenever I was about 8.
Okay.
And I have one brother and I have 3 sisters.
Now,
One's,
older or younger?
my brother's younger,
Okay.
and all my sisters were older. Well, one. I had a young, wait a minute, Paul is my youngest brother, and then Nancy, she's deceased, were younger.
Okay.
And then I had Thelma, my older sister, and Miriam, and she's older.
What's your father's name?
Albert,
Albert. And your mother?
Olive.
Okay, now,
And then my father remarried.
I was going to ask you that, yeah.
Yeah, he remarried, and her name was Mary,
Okay.
and she died, and he married again.
And his third wife?
I don't know much about, we didn't have much correlation with the third one.
Okay, all right, you were growing up by that time, I take it.
Yeah, oh yeah, well, I'd left. Yeah.
All right, and what did your father do?
My father worked for Westinghouse.
In what capacity?
He was employed in the manufacturing of transformers down in Sharon, Pennsylvania.
Okay,
The plant no longer exists.
worked in a plant. All right, okay, and so where did you go to school?
Through the normal Sharon High School is where I graduated
Right.
in 1955. And
What
then
kind of major did you have there? Did you have a major in high school or?
Well, I was going to go to college. I was going to be an engineer. So
Pre-college prep type courses then?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
good school.
okay.
Yeah, I was in the band, played tuba,
All right,
sousaphone. Swinging them. We had a tremendous deal with the band, and we had 4 tubas right up front of the band, leading the band onto the field of football. We had a lot of fun.
that's the football season, but did you have any sports like wrestling and track,
No.
baseball, anything like that?
No.
Okay. How were your grades in high school?
They were all right. They got me into school, here into college.
I mean, like A's and B's, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, yeah. But I didn't, I wasn't a valedictorian or anything.
What were some of your favorite subjects?
Biology and math.
Math, okay,
Big time.
all right. So when you went to Penn State, did you go to a local campus first? And
Oh,
then
no.
You went straight to State?
No, I
College,
just-
University Park?
Youngstown, Ohio was really close to Sharon, and they had a university there of some repute. And my dad said, well, why don't I just go to Youngstown? And I thought about that, said, stayed at home. I'm the first one in the family to ever go to college, from on his side of the family all the way back. And I said, I don't think that's going to work. Being home and going there is just not the right atmosphere.
What would the commute have been like?
Probably half hour, 45 minutes.
That's still a lot,
Yeah.
Besides, it's not
But I didn't have a car either, so that would have had to happen.
Right, and that's not really a college experience, I understand, so.
No. No, so I set my heart on going to Penn State. I had some cousins that had gone to Penn State, and I decided that's what I was going to do. So I was going to have to pay my own way, so it wasn't going to happen right after graduation. So all my friends went to college, and a couple of them went to Penn State. And so I tracked how they did and all that. And they were going, one of them was going to study physics. So I figured he's going to stay on the scientific side so I get a good feel of what's going on at Penn State. And so I went and took 2 or 3 jobs and then went for some senatorial scholarships and stuff like that. And of course, back then, I think it was $500 a semester at Penn State for tuition. If you can imagine that being the thing. So the biggest problem was where you're going to live. So I had to get the money to do that. And so one day, I applied, Penn State, was accepted.
And what kind of jobs did you have to help work your way into that?
I worked in a gas station. Back then, you greased cars and pumped gas and did all that stuff.
Wipe the windshield. And
Yeah, right, yeah, the old time.
For you guys coming out to take
And
care
I
of the
worked in a
car.
grocery store. As a
Stocking shelves or?
Yeah, stocking shelves. And that's pretty much what I was doing.
Right.
And I was able to collect enough money to do it.
So did you start the fall after you graduated from high school or just?
No.
Yeah,
The year, I stayed out a year.
stayed out here and worked some
Yeah.
jobs to get some money. So after you spent a year then, and then in the fall, did you go straight to
Yeah.
University Park and start as a freshman there?
Yeah, they set up an orientation program. So my dad and I drove down to Penn State, and we stayed there. And I had to be interviewed by some people on campus, and you had to take a test. So I did a test, and they were trying to find out where you should really go, which school you should enter, and all that stuff, because being accepted at Penn State didn't necessarily mean you were telling them what you wanted to do. So they said, you know, you really ought to go into business school. And I said, well, that's nice. I think I'll do that after I get my engineering degree. And they just looked at me and says, okay. So I was going to be a chemical engineer. And so all the courses you take your first year are pretty much the same on the engineering side. Chemistry, physics, mathematics, all that kind of stuff. And they don't let you near the engineering or the liberal arts part of the campus. In fact, it was kind of a joke, because the engineering school briefed and says, you realize that you are very limited on this campus. And they were pulling a joke. And I said, how so? It says, you're not allowed to go near the business school, and you're definitely not allowed near any of the liberal arts schools. Those engineers are not allowed. And I said, well, how do you differentiate? He says, they will differentiate because you'll be wearing your slide rule on your belt. And to them, that's a weapon. So anyway, we went through that. And,
Did you live in the dorm?
Oh, you had to. First year you had to.
How long did you stay in the dorm? You stay in
1 year.
1 year, and then
Yeah.
you went off campus?
Well, remember the classmate, that time I was in physics, joined a fraternity. So naturally I went out and checked the fraternity and joined that. It was Phi Mu Delta. Okay?
So you lived there off campus then?
The second year.
Huh.
You couldn't do that the first year.
Right.
And then things were going along fine, but before the second year, when I came home, my stepmother was having serious medical problems. So, and I was doing a summer job, and I had to quit the summer job because she was in the hospital. So I spent every day in the hospital with her until she died.
Right.
And that was after, you know, that, of course, I was into the fall, so school had already started, so I didn't go back. My sister lived in Kansas City, so we decided, she asked me if I wanted to come to Kansas City for a while, and so I did, to get away from everything. So I stayed there for about a semester's worth, and then I got a letter from a cousin who was at Penn State, Air Force captain, who was back studying meteorology. The Air Force sent him back to get a master's. So he said, well, why don't you come back to Penn State and you just live with us? So I reapplied, got in, and the issue is I wanted to be back in the Air Force ROTC, which I had been in the prior year as a freshman.
You started out with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was no problem. So I
How'd
got back
you make
in.
that decision to want to go into Air Force ROTC?
Yeah, that's kind of funny, because in high school, there were two things I knew that I was telling you the other day about life plans. In high school, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to be an engineer and I wanted to be in the Air Force. So when I went to Penn State, naturally, I joined the Air Force ROTC. And then, obviously, Air Force, too. So I was now studying engineering and doing what I had planned to do. And it wasn't easy, but it's certainly worth the investment in time and energy. So during that time, I worked in a gas station in State College because I needed the money to eat with, you know.
Right.
So did that for the first year. Then when I came back, I did that again, and Eventually, I joined the fraternity, so I was living in the fraternity, and you know, everything got a little tight, and a bunch of us engineers in the fraternity decided to move out, and we moved in. We rented a house there.
Okay.
There was some of the professors have these homes there at that time, and they would rent out the whole building to groups.
Now, what year was it by this time?
That was 1957, I think. Yeah, that would have been 57. I graduated in 55. I didn't go to Penn State until the following year, so.
56, so,
And by the time we moved out of the fraternity, it was 57.
okay. All right, so you're working your way through college down there in
Then I
State
started-
College.
Yeah, and I started getting very interested in finding a job at a gas station, so to pay the way. So I was starting to work for a couple of professors in the electrical engineering school, and they asked me to join them in Honors for Research, which I thought was pretty good. And that time I was an electronic technician to them, but I was really drafting. You know, I was drafting up all their papers and stuff like that. I'd prepare their presentations when they were doing worldwide programs, doing Honors for Research.
How was the pay on that?
It was enough to.
Good enough, huh?
I bet you if I dug, I'd probably have the checks. I don't throw anything away. I still have the check stubs. But anyway, it was enough to get me by. But what was the magic about it was where I was working. Now think about it, your career, your resume. Back then I didn't even know what a resume was.
Right.
But look what you're doing. And I was working with some of the best professors, and they were also my professors, so I had a different relationship than just being a student in their class.
How were your grades at this time?
They were okay.
Good enough to get by, right?
Oh, well, they were better than good enough to get by, but
okay.
yeah, they were okay.
Okay.
So,
When did you meet your wife?
well, that was crazy because, see, one of my fraternity brothers just happened to be the head of the ROTC group. He was what we called the wing commander, essentially. And he was a cadet colonel. And at that time, I was a cadet major, but I was in charge of all the band, the drum and bugle corps, and that stuff. How I wangled that, I can't remember because I'm not a really good musician anyway.
Maybe because you're a high school.
That's called volunteers.
Right.
They didn't care about your high school. They said, "Oh, you volunteer to do that?" I said, "Yeah, let's do it." So, anyway, one day he said, "Well, come on and have coffee." We had a place in State College. I can't remember the name of the.
It's okay, you can speak up.
What?
Corner room.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, the corner room. And it's still there, I believe. Very famous place where all the students went to have coffee. And so I went with him that day, and he had his girlfriend and Mary, Mary was a sorority sister of his girlfriend. And the sorority was really a fraternity called Phi Mu. Okay? So that's when I met Mary. And we got along pretty decent. And then we started dating. And one thing came to the next. And geez, in about a year, we decided this is going to get full time. And at the first Liberty Bowl game, we were going to take, there were about 3 of us from the fraternity and 3 of the gals from the sorority. We're going to go down to Philadelphia for the first Liberty Bowl game and spend the weekend and have a good time. So the guys stayed with this fraternity brother's uncle's house, which was a pretty elegant place. And I don't know where the girls stayed. Where did the girls stay? Anyway.
At Sandy Lamont's house.
Okay, so one of the sorority sisters had a family there in Philadelphia, so they stayed there. And so we behaved. That's the message there, okay? All right. Back then you didn't do the other. Anyway.
Well, not that anybody know about it.
Yeah, right. Right. So we went, let's say they went to the game, and I had a deal with my fraternity brother's aunt to take me to the jewelry section in Philadelphia to buy a ring. I was going to get engaged at the Liberty Bowl game. Okay.
Now, where were you were you a sophomore or junior by this time, or?
A junior.
Junior,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so I went with his aunt, and of course Philadelphia traffic was like you know LA. And so they went on to the game. Well, I show up at the game a bit late. And the ice was very obvious. Someone was not speaking to me much. Okay, because where had I been with everybody's there at the game having a good time? So anyway.
Of course, you couldn't tell her. Not right
Well, I
then.
couldn't tell her where I was going, and then that would explain why I was late.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, here. And I essentially put the ring in her hand and says, there's where I've been. Are you engaged or not? And that was it. So anyway.
It sounds like a military engagement.
Yeah, right. Attack and, you know. But anyway, we had a lot of fun with that. Had a great trip there. Then we, as we entered the senior year, of course, she was ahead of me by 6 months.
Okay.
And because she graduated from high school a year after I did. So anyway, we had a deal that when I stayed after I graduated waiting on my orders. At that time, they were 3 or 4 months always late. And I had a slot in flying school, so that was worth holding on to. So I stayed, continued to work at Honors for Research. One day I get a letter, and it's the Air Force saying, here's your orders, and you report on 9 April to Waco, Texas for flying school.
Okay, now you would have graduated by that time, right?
I would have, yeah, I graduated in January of '61. She graduated in, I think, in June of '60.
Now, when you say flying school, is this navigator school? Or?
Yeah, this was navigator school. And so then I immediately called Mary. She's now in Johnstown working for the YWCA. And she was also working for, what was the utility company?
Penelec,
Yeah,
Pennsylvania
she was
Electric Company.
teaching, she studied home economics. So she was teaching them how to use the equipment and cook and all this stuff when I was at Penn State waiting on the orders. So I called her and said, hey, I'm coming up to Johnstown's where she's from. And I went to Johnstown and sat around the table for dinner that night. And her father, by the way, is a mining engineer. Her brother's a mining engineer. The other brother-in-law, she has a brother and a sister. The brother-in-law was a school teacher. I was really welcomed into the family because I was an engineer. Anyway, so we had a little discussion, said, look, got the orders, and I think this had to be March when I got the orders, so the date is coming up fast, so said, let's set the date, let's get married, and we'll go to Waco. So we figured we'd do the trip to Waco as our honeymoon. My orders put me on active duty on the 8th, or the 9th actually, so we got married on the 8th. Big church in Johnstown, Presbyterian church, had suffered many floods damage in years past. Anyway, there we go. Got married and headed down to Waco and entered the Air Force and had a really super class. We had some instructors that were kind of weirdo, but that's okay. That happens. And so...
How long was navigator school?
I believe it was about a year long, by the time you get through all the aspects of navigation.
You learned radar intercepts also, or?
No. That's been a separate career field. They were teaching that at Waco, but that was a separate career field. No, I had no intention of that. So. After we graduated from Nav school, we went back to Johnstown for a month leave, and then we were going back to Mather outside of Sacramento to go to electronic warfare school. So we went there and completed that course, and the commander of the school called me in and said, by the way, you probably noticed that they didn't ask you what you wanted for an assignment, because you're going to stay as an instructor. Well, at Penn State, I was in the first class in electronics for solid state. And that was really a challenge because it was taught by physicists. They weren't engineers, so you know the intensity of that program.
Right.
Well, this guy had found out that I was in solid state and the Air Force was converting from vacuum tubes to solid state. So I said, you're going to stay here as an instructor and rewrite our course and make it solid state versus vacuum tubes. Well, you know, when he's a lieutenant colonel, I'm a second lieutenant, I really have a lot of option, right?
Right.
So you salute smartly and say, I don't like what you're doing to me, but that's okay. I'll
You don't
do it
even say
anyway."
that, you just say, yes, sir.
Well, I did, you know, I had a little problem in the Air Force, yeah. I never recognized that I was a lieutenant.
Well, one
So,
of two things can happen then. Either you get promoted real fast or,
well,
or something else.
to give you a good example, one day, the class had a flight. You had to fly 3 hours a month. Remember those days? So we had to sit down at the base ops and wait for an airplane to go get our monthly time. If you're in the program where you're not going to fly that month, you've got to go get some flying time. So you just hop a ride, whoever's flying around the circles down there. So one of the classmates and I went down there and lined up with this flight, and the airplane had a mechanical problem. So we were delayed. Well, the rule is you had to have a flight lunch because it's going to be at least a 5-hour flight. So we got our flight lunch and we sat there, and there's a time due on the flight lunch that says you have to consume this within this period of time. But we're getting very close to that, and they were sticklers about this. And then the flight surgeon got very upset if you were eating a flight lunch that had an hour over when it was due,
Wow.
which is crazy. Anyway, so we said, all right, we got this flight and it's about to go, and we're going to be gone 5 more hours. It means we have to get another flight lunch. So we did. Think nothing of it. Flight lunch, the flight kitchen didn't care. So we got our flight lunch and took our flight and came back. About a month later, we get a call with this from this major who was in charge of that program on the personnel side. And he called us in, and we grabbed our class commander to go in too. And this major looks at me and he says, "You realize what you did?" I says, "Yeah, I came in here and sat down. What else did I do?" He said, "Well, you bought 2 flight lunches." I said, "Yeah, that's probably what we did." "Well, you know that's not legal." I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "And furthermore, you and my classmate were going to get a letter of reprimand, an Article 15 for the flight lunch." Well, back then, the rules of UCMJ were you had a choice. If you got a reprimand or Article 15, you could select a court-martial. And I said, "No, I want a court-martial." He said, "You can't do that." I said, "Major, yes, I can. I'm still a second lieutenant." I said, "Besides, I'm a second lieutenant, who cares?" "Yes, you will. I will demand a court-martial." And he says, "Why are you doing that?" I says, "I want the rest of the world to know how stupid you are." And he said, "That's insubordinate." I said, "Probably. Add that to the list. This is the dumbest meeting I've ever attended in my life." And off we went.
So what happened?
Well, he finally decided he just put that letter of reprimand in the desk and forget it. I said, "That's probably a good thing for your career." Then we left.
Okay.
And we graduated. No problem.
All right,
So
now
I
you-
became an instructor.
You're an instructor now. This is what year now?
This would have had to been, let's see, 62 probably.
Okay, now how long were you instructing there, Mother?
Not quite a year and a half. I did the program, went to instructor school, came out as a distinguished graduate, and the commander, the chief of the EW school was very pleased with that. So I wrote his course the way he wanted it. About a year and a half after I started there, I got called to personnel. I was on the platform teaching something about one of the klystrons or something in a radar system. And I got interrupted, and this messenger said I had to go to personnel right now. I said, "Well, maybe something's catching up on me." So you don't argue with sergeant's in personnel. So I went to personnel.
Right.
And he said, you know why you're here? I said, I haven't a clue. What did I do wrong? He says, are you kidding me? Do you realize what's going to happen when you go back to the office? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you just got the best assignment in the Air Force. And we have no idea how this happened, but you got it. And I said, what's that? He says, you're going to be assigned to Wiesbaden, Germany, the 7405th Support Squadron. And I can't tell you what it is because you don't have a clearance yet. So I said, okay, what do we do? He says, here's your dates and all this, and here's all the details about your transfer and your movement and all that, and how the shipping is arranged and all that stuff. So
So you go in there with no idea what you're gonna be doing.
I have no idea. No, I never heard of the organization. I'm just in the Air Force for 2 years, you know. So next thing I said, do you have anything on Wiesbaden? He says, yeah, here's a film. I said, you have a projector? Yeah, well, back then that's all you had. So yeah, I took a projector home with the film, and I went home. I didn't go to the office because it was late in the day that day. But so I went home, and Mary's at the front door. Says, we're going to Germany. Really? How'd you find out about that? Wives Club? Are you kidding me? That Intel channel is faster than anything we ever had. So I said, okay, well, I have a film and a projector. So we set it up and watched it. Said, hey, this is pretty exciting. This is nice, you know, good stuff.
Still second lieutenant, or you made first lieutenant by then?
I think I was first lieutenant by then. In fact, I was a permanent first lieutenant. I had been a reserve officer through ROTC, but I was a permanent first lieutenant then. And so we looked that over and set it up, and we had 2 dogs. We had 2 poodles. We had a toy poodle that we had bought there at Mather, and we had a miniature poodle about middle size, about this size, that I bought her in Waco for her birthday, or for Christmas, our first Christmas in Waco. So now we said, well, what are we going to do with the dogs? I said, we'll just take them with us. Because I looked at the rule book and said, no problem. So we set that all up, and actually the dogs travel better than she did. She went in a CL-44. Do you know what a CL-44 is?
No, I don't.
Well, I never saw one face up. It has a swing tail. So that's how you put the cargo in. The tail swings in this. But they were using it for transport for the families and that, going back and forth to Germany, wherever. So to get there, we went back home, packed up everything, and had a full JTR. You know what the full JTR is?
I don't.
Well, back then, that meant you had your full weight allowance, which was sizable. And we didn't have that much, but you accepted that because that meant when you're in Germany, if you want to buy furniture, you could bring it all back.
Right.
Well, you see there's 2 grandfather's clocks. One of them I bought well, I'll tell you that later. But anyway, so we packed up everything and set up all the details with the dogs, went back to Pennsylvania with the folks and set up from there that I would depart because I would have to go there for at least a month before she could come over. So she stayed with her folks, and then I went on to Wiesbaden, stayed in American Arms, which was the big BOQ there right in the middle of Wiesbaden at that time, until I waited on some housing. And the housing was really neat because all the real estate agents were former Nazi generals. And they had a really crazy way of working. So when you go down to this headquarters, Air Force headquarters, and you tell them you're looking for a place, well, they knew that. So they'd give you a list of these guys you would contact. And you would call them, and they would send you to these locations. I never met them. Mm-hmm. They would send you to these locations to look at the housing. And finally, they sent me to this one place in Rüsselsheim, which is the city where the Opel plant is. Brand spanking new apartment building, and we were going to have the bottom floor apartment, which was really nice. So I signed up to that, and then I could tell her to come on over, because now we have a place to live.
So you're living off base, when you do this.
You
So
have
you're-
to.
You're on BAQ.
Yeah, you're on BAQ, and you're off base for at least a year.
Okay.
So we set up for that. It was a beautiful place, like I said, brand spanking new. So I called her and said, hey, we can come back, you can come over now, and we set it all up for her to come over. And then I found out that the way those real estate agents work is, depending on your rank, that's how much you pay them once a year. And it would be $100 or $200 or whatever, depending upon your rank. That's what you paid them during the time you were using the quarters they got you. That's how they got their fee. Crazy operation. So anyway, I told Mary, come on over.
Didn't you have to pay rent? Didn't you have to pay rent every month?
Oh yeah, yeah. I paid rent to the owner of the apartment that lived upstairs.
But you had to pay the
But
agent
then you had to pay the agent once a year a stipend.
its fee, yeah.
Yeah. Crazy world. So I fell in love with the von Steuben Hotel in Wiesbaden, because boy, the chef there was unbelievable. So we bring Mary over, and now she's been traveling how many hours? 10 hours coming in at that time in this CL44, and they'd stop about 3 times. Every time they had a general on board, and every time he wanted a cup of coffee, he had to land someplace to get him a cup of coffee. Different world then. So she arrives in Frankfurt, and I go get her, and of course you can imagine she's really wide awake, right? So I said, hey, we're going to go to the von Steuben for dinner. She really was interested in doing that. I think the animals had arrived earlier, because I picked them up. They came in a 707
Right, probably.
jet. She's in a prop.
Yeah.
Anyways, she really wasn't too fascinated by the von Steuben, so then we went to the apartment and everything. And the first thing she did was she walked in the apartment and looked at the kitchen, just sat down and cried. She's a gourmet cook. This kitchen had to be, if it were 5 feet by 5 feet, that would have been oversized.
Tiny little place, huh?
Oh yeah. Plus the refrigerator, no ice cubes, because the refrigerator was provided by the Army, and it was really old. I think it was older than I was, but you only bought food for the day. That was the custom in Europe. They didn't stock up. They didn't have closets with food. They went out and bought what they needed that day. So we finally got accustomed to that and had a good tour. Then, of course, my job, I had to wait to get the clearance to even go in the building. And
How long do you have to wait for that?
about 6 months.
So you're sitting around for 6 months doing nothing, or?
Oh yeah. Well, they didn't give you an extra duty, because they didn't need you around, because you're going to be all these people that have all these clearances, and they don't want you near them. So
you just
besides that,
Sat for 6 months, it must have been boring.
it was really boring.
It's like a flight pool.
Yeah, well, you couldn't fly because of the airplanes and
Right.
stuff. But it was really interesting, because you find out after you got the clearance, you found out that you're really not there. I said, oh, one of those cases now. So I'm here, but I'm not here. And I found that out because I was an electronics engineer. I belonged to the IEEE. Well, it wasn't IEEE then. It was the IRE and the AIEE, or whatever it was. I would get magazines with, the electronics, all about radars and stuff that I was doing, microwaves. And the squadron commander called me and says, you can't do that. I looked at him and said, what do you mean I can't do that? He says, you've got to stop those mailings because you're breaking the code. You're not supposed to be here, number one, and number two, you're certainly not to be known for what you know. I said,
Okay,
I haven't figured out how I'm going to work with this world yet. And I said, okay, fine.
I get it. First of all, since you're not there, you can't be receiving stuff there.
Right.
And secondly, you can't be receiving that stuff because that tells somebody about what you're all about.
Who I am,
Yeah.
and why am I in there, assigned as a navigator.
Right.
Well, anyway, we finally got all over that stuff, and I found out that he was a lieutenant colonel, very nice, but not very bright.
Now tell me what you were doing there once you finally did get your job.
I was going to be flying in clandestine covert airplanes. You know what that means? A
Well,
covert airplane is an airplane that changes configuration in flight,
Okay,
okay? That means doors open, things come out of the wings and the body of the airplane, and you're doing collections.
so it looks like one thing, but then when it gets in the air, it becomes
Right.
something else.
Yeah. And clandestine because we were doing things that really weren't what we were doing. In other words, we were flying in and out of Berlin in cargo airplanes, simulating we were cargo airplanes, when in fact we were doing other stuff.
No
We
cargo.
had no cargo, or we had one airplane that we flew in and out of there that was a Convair airplane, and it had one passenger, and the passenger was an Army major, and he would sit in the back of the airplane with a button, and he would direct the navigator, and the navigator knew his route, and they would fly in the quarter and go to the edge or wherever he needed to get a picture. And when he would get there, he'd press a button, the door would open, the cameras would work.
So you're flying out of Berlin over East Germany, taking photos clandestinely,
Yeah.
and you were a navigator on this aircraft?
No, I wasn't one on, that was one of our other squadron airplanes. I was on one that was doing electronic stuff.
Okay, electronic surveillance.
Yeah.
Okay, but you were a navigator doing this clandestine type work.
Well, I was named as a navigator, but I was operating the equipment,
Okay,
so I wasn't really
you
navigating.
weren't really navigating, you were
No.
operating the secret stuff.
And we had other airplanes where, when we'd land someplace, there'd be 10 navigators get off the airplane.
Well, how long were you doing this?
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah, we were flying in the Baltic, up there near where Francis Powers
Got shot down,
you
yeah?
know, right. And did you ever read the book Little Toy Dog?
No.
That's about a 747 or a 7. Yeah, no, yeah. What the heck was this thing? It was a SAC Wrecking Bird. It got shot down by the Russians, and 2 of the people survived. There were others that nobody ever heard another word from, and they ended up in Lubyanka. And that was what the heck was a B-47? And we were up in that area too, but we were in C-97s. Always flew with jets, or, you know, MiGs on each wing, and they'd try to get you to go into Russia. We flew in the Black Sea, in the Med, the Caribbean, or not the Caribbean, but the Med, and the Black Sea, big time.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, I had more air medals when I left Europe than I got in Vietnam.
Okay,
Well, we had a ball. Now, during that time, see, somebody had to pay attention to that equipment to make sure that it was doing what it's supposed to do. Well, I didn't see anybody volunteering to do that, so I said, okay, here's volunteer again. I said, I'll be responsible. So I became the person responsible for the aircraft configurations.
the maintenance of that stuff.
No, I didn't maintain it, but I made sure that the stuff did what it was supposed to do, and I worked with maintenance while they maintained it.
Right.
But, you know, I saw to the configurations, meaning if it needed a new device, I was the one that would work back to the Pentagon to get that requirement.
But you made some good contacts doing all that.
Yeah, I fell into something I could not believe. And that was one afternoon, I met a sergeant from the headquarters, and he had heard about what I was doing because he had talked to some of the tech reps that were assigned there from the companies that provided the equipment. And one of the groups included young guys that would show up in trench coats. And we kept telling them, you shouldn't wear a trench coat, you give away your identity.
It's like a uniform.
Yeah, well, yeah, where they were from was where you know they were from.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Anyway, so I had a reputation with this office in the headquarters in Europe. And so they sent this sergeant, and I started talking to him, and it turns out I found out Big Safari. And Big Safari was the organization in the Air Force governed. We have our own set of regulations, and that's who created these airplanes and maintained them. And so I was entering into the Big Safari program, and we worked a deal. Since we had the major, or this lieutenant colonel was our squadron commander, we had to bypass him totally because he had no clue what was going on. The wing commander was, at that time, really didn't give much of a rat's about what the airplanes were doing. He couldn't care less if they worked or not. His replacement was General Slay, Al Slay. At that time, he was only a colonel. And I met him one time. We had a dining out in Frankfurt. And I went up to him and I said, Colonel, I hope you have bigger balls than your predecessor, because we need help on these equipments. And I'd be very happy to give your own personal tour and briefing, which he immediately accepted. And everybody around me thought, you just kissed your career goodbye, talking to him like that, his new wing commander. So the following Monday, I got
Well, maybe
a
he
phone.
spoke the language, you know, that might have been,
He did.
I think you might have hit a nerve there.
And I did. I don't know whether I had a second sense about that, but I was right on. That following Monday, my squadron commander was really upset. He called me up to his office and said, what the hell did you do at that dining in? I said, did nothing. He said, well, did you insult the wing commander? I said, hell no, we had a great conversation. He said, well, he just called for you to be up there in his office right now. I said, okay. So I went over to his office across the street and walked in, and he shut the door immediately. He sat down and he says, tell me more about what we need to do.
Oh,
He
good.
didn't say a word about the other. And we laid just like that.
So everything went smooth from then on. Now, what was your next assignment, and how did
My
you get
next
there?
is, well, when it got time, 3 years now in Germany, it got time to go, and a bunch of us sat around the table and said, you know, right now Vietnam's going big, and the new program called Wild Weasels was there on the
Now,
table.
what year was this by this time?
This was about 67.
Okay, so yeah, Vietnam War raging at this point.
Very much. And see, we were Germany 64 to 67. And of course, Stephanie had been born in 65 there in Germany. And so here I was. Now we have a family, still had 2 dogs, and we're thinking about what the assignment's going to be. And a bunch of us said, there's no way we want anything but the Wild Weasels, because the other thing was a B-666, and you'd be flying recce up there, and not very exciting.
Could you explain Wild Weasel for us?
Wild Weasel is a program that was created by a general in the Pentagon, and the purpose was when the Russians and the Chinese got into the war in Vietnam, North Vietnam, they started bringing in the guns. The Chinese brought the guns, the Russians brought in the SAM missiles, the SA-2 surface-to-air missiles, with the guideline missile and the Fansong radar. And that really started changing the air war. They started losing airplanes all over the place because no one knew what the heck to do. They couldn't sense them, they couldn't track them, what. So they had a big conference in the Pentagon, and they decided that we needed a program, a configuration of an airplane that could detect these SAM radars and take out the SAM missile sites to protect the strike force. So they named the program the Wild Weasel. And Secretary Brown was Secretary of the Air Force then. And of course, Johnson was president. What a waste of time. But he decided that they would try this. So they contracted with an aerospace company here on the West Coast, and they took some F-100s and configured them special because it could hold 2 people, a pilot and an EW, and they could contain equipment that would sense those radars, because it was an electronics company up in Northern California that had come up with these sensors and these receivers. So they did that, and they did a test run, and that was super top secret back then. And so they took the F-100s over to Korat, Thailand, and that's where they flew out of and flew up north and were trolling around to see if they can get the attention and find out what these missiles were doing and what the radars were doing. And lo and behold, one of those airplanes did kill a SAM site. So that cinched the mission.
They knew it worked.
Yeah, that proved it right there. A big celebration, and the crew was very famous for doing that. And they decided that now we have to look at the configuration of that airplane versus the force. We had the 105s doing the strike force, and here's his 100s doing this other mission. Well, the first thing they found out, those airplanes are not compatible in flight.
Well, the 100 is a way out of date airplane.
Well,
at that time.
so was the Thud then. You know, Thud was built before I was out of high school. But the problem was the speed of the Thud was not compatible with the speed of the 100. The 100 was just way too slow.
Right.
So everybody says, well, that's why we had the phrase last in, or first in, last out. That had nothing to do with it, because if you have a configuration difference like that with two airplanes, one was going to be going out of there before you could come out. But that wasn't it at all. The reason why they had the expression first in, last out, you went in before the strike force, and then you came out after the strike force to make sure they weren't getting hit on the tail end, you know.
Right.
So then they went to 105s, and that's about the transition point where we were entering the program. Well, a bunch of us sat around the table and said, you know, there's one way to do this. If we volunteer for the B-66s, we'll probably get it when we want the weasels. So let's not volunteer for anything. So there were 4 or 5 of us that did that, and we all got the weasels. And the other guys that volunteered got the B-66s. So we got what we want. And so it's 67 now. We packed up and headed home. And we found a place in Pittsburgh that was near Johnstown and her brother there in Pittsburgh, and rented that house for her and Stephanie and the animals.
Right. This is going to be an unaccompanied tour of Karat.
Oh, you better believe it. Yeah, there was no way they were taking them in there, even though Karat was not in the combat zone. So we got that house, and then our next stop was going to be Nellis, because we had to go to weasel training. So we went out to Nellis. It just turned out that one of my class commander from NAS school had been in the 100s, the weasels. And everybody's now getting back together again. But he was working on a new missile called the Standard Arm, so he wasn't in Vegas anymore. So his house was open. So he said, why don't you just take our house? You pay the mortgage, you know, for that period of time, and we'll be off doing what we're doing in New Mexico, or developing this new missile with the Navy. And that worked out great. So we had a house in Vegas, and I went to the Weasel School there and had a lot of fun. Now, stop and think, I've been flying these transport airplanes, prop airplanes. Now I'm going to be in the back seat of an F-105. Can you think of anything more exciting? You're a jet fighter. So.
Well, I wasn't. I was a UE pilot, but.
Oh, okay. Well, that's right. That's right. But anyway.
I've ridden jets, so.
Yeah, but you know that was really exciting. So here we are, learning how to fly that airplane, and lo and behold, we're studying how to be weasels, and they came down with a problem with the 111s. And in North Vietnam, the mountains are like karsts. They're abrupt, straight cliffs. So, you know, we're flying in with a terrain following radar, your beam goes out, but it goes over there. It's like stealth. So they're flying into these cars, losing airplanes. And somebody, I think Three-Fingered Jack Ryan was the chief of staff of the Air Force. And we call him the Three-Fingered Jack because he lost his fingers. Anyway, he decided that we needed someone to take the mission, which was night low-level bombing. They could take that away from the 111s because we couldn't afford to lose the 111s. And I said, yeah, that meant you could afford to lose the Thuds. So they asked us for volunteers who wanted to take on that mission in addition to the Weasels. I learned that word was a good one. So I volunteered. And
dangerous job.
yeah, we had about 5 crews that volunteered for that. And so we had to now learn how to do this. A 105 has a terrain following radar, probably version 1. And it was all mechanicals. You had to go set up all these dials before you took off and set up exactly what you're going to do. And that's at the level of which the airplane would descend and stay there. And then when needed, it would take the actions. So we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll set it. So here's the level we're required. And let's see, my pilot had 6 kids, so that's 50 foot per kid. And then I had Stephanie and Mary. And
Did your
that's-
pilot really have
Oh,
6
well,
kids?
Yeah, he really did. And it was really funny how you do,
Right.
you know what I'm talking about. Crazy things you do in the military. But that's when we set our standard. We really do
So
that.
how'd that all go with that terrain following business down there? You know, you could have flown to the side of a mountain if you
Well,
were
we
careful,
practiced
so-
in Bryce Canyon at night.
Okay,
In Bryce Canyon. Not
okay,
up.
right.
But it was okay. Yeah.
The equipment worked well, so
Yeah,
it kept off the side
Yeah,
of the
well,
mountain, so.
we're watching the radar and we know what the symbols are, everything. He had a radar and I had, my pilot and I had our own separate radars. So anyway, it worked okay. And so when we finished learning that, then guess what? They captured the Pueblo. When the North Vietnamese or North Koreans captured the Pueblo, and they were going to get all kinds of information. So anyway,
Electronics,
we were invited, we were in a class studying something, and we were, so okay, class time, we're all going to the club. A little different, I mean, it's not even lunchtime. So we ended up at the club, and they said, you guys all just graduated.
and how much of your course got cut off?
Well, we had about 3 more months.
Well, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal, but they figured you're competent enough, no sweat. So the next day, there was nothing left at Nellis. It had all moved to Osan, Korea,
That's where you went.
right? Yeah, I was one of the lucky ones that couldn't, we ran out of airplanes for people to fly over there, so we ended up going commercial and got stuck in Tokyo for 2 weeks.
Oh,
Tough. I
that's-
hated that every
I
second.
know you did, I know.
But I sure had a lot of electronics when I left there because I found out of where the Akihabara section is in Tokyo.
Right.
That's where they sell all the goodies. So when we went through Tokyo, we ended up down in Seoul. And then from Seoul, we went into Osan.
How long did you stay in Osan?
Probably about no more than 2 months.
What'd you do there?
We were flying. Yeah, we were on alert. We were in the new alert hangars. You know, those hangars have 2 doors like they have in Cabrio. We would sit in there. This is January. It's 10 below 0 outside.
Yeah.
We're sitting in that airplane. There's one thing you know about a Thud. It has no insulation. Okay? So we're sitting there in long johns and a flight suit. We refuse to wear the poopy suit because that's too darn uncomfortable. And every now and then they'd come by and you'd flip up. They had 2 separate canopies on a Thud. You'd open up the canopies and they'd stick a hose in each one and let it there for 10 minutes and then lift the canopy, take the hose out. That was the heat. Well, the minute they took the hose out, it was back ice cold again. But, and then every now and then they say, okay, it's time to fly. So we'd line up flight of 2. And of course, Osan has a very inconvenient situation, as you're hearing now with all the talk over there. The North Koreans could watch everything you're doing. So we'd line up 2 on the runway, they'd line up 3. We'd line up 4, they'd line up 2 flights. And we figured, hey, you know, this is interesting. If we do this enough, they'll run out of fuel. And we don't have to fly anywhere. So, but we still were flying. We had to keep proficient because we're going to Osan, or over to Thailand to fly as weasels, so we had to play the game.
I'm just curious, how long did you sit there on standby at a time?
You were there probably 2 hours.
2 hours on standby freezing, and then they finally launch you, or they wouldn't, right?
Well, yeah, chances are you didn't. I mean, they
Yeah.
just, you know, because you'd be scheduled for a flight maybe the next day just to stay proficient. And we found out that the Hawk sites were really exciting in Korea. So we would use the Hawk sites as missile sites, and we'd go up and they'd watch us and we'd watch them. And it was very sketchy because our systems did not really track those frequencies. and we would roll in on them like we were attacking the SAM site, and that's how we practiced. And this Army general came down to OSAM one time and he said, you know, guys, we love this. Can we work out a schedule so that and we'll work with you. I said, for God's sake, make sure you're cold, because those Hawks were worse than SAMs. So we come in there and they had a lot of these real high mountains over there where they have their Hawks. And we come in down in the valley, pop up, and then roll in on them, see? And they had us when we were even in the valley track, and they were solid on us all the way.
So Hawk was better than a Sam.
Well, it scared the hell out of us, because if anybody would have done it, we'd have been dead. It wasn't like the SAMs.
That was my first enlisted assignment, was Hawk Missile School in Fort
Oh,
Bliss,
really?
Texas, but it got canceled because I was going OCS.
But I'll tell
So
you
I never
this,
got to go there. I would have been a
this-
Lance Corporal, you know, doing Hawk, so probably out of Da Nang.
but those Hawks were, I was impressed. So the general came back at it. We were doing this for a little while, and he came down and says, okay, guys, he had his own helicopter. He said, okay, 5 of you guys, let's go. So we all got on the helicopter, and he flew us to one of the mountains there, sites. They rolled the red carpet out. I didn't realize the Army ate that well. They had a chef there would win honors all around the world. It was that good, you know. And they dined and wined us that whole day, and said, we can't thank you enough. Says, this is really exciting because we can actually do something rather than just sit there and play games, you know, because you didn't have simulators like that then.
From Korea, you went to Karat, right?
And finally the orders came, it was time to go to Karat. So, you know, when we left the States, we had winter gear and summer gear. And you know how much baggage that is? Just think about it. So, okay, so off we go to Karat. Now we landed in Bangkok, right country, and
You're flying in a Thud, right?
no, oh no, couldn't take the airplanes. They had to stay there because they were continuous. They were,
Okay, yeah,
They
they were,
didn't close down the
they
operation,
were
it was
assigned
just-
to there, and you just transferred over to another.
yeah, they came in from Japan.
Transferred over to a new squadron, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, all that stuff is in the details of what squadron numbers and all that.
Right.
But, so the 130 came to Bangkok, picked us up, took to Karat. We landed at Karat, and they opened the door, and this guy, one of the guys who'd been with us in the 7405th in Wiesbaden, Germany, grabbed my hand and said, welcome to Karat, you're the new wing EWO. So, electronic warfare officer. So I immediately was part of the wing staff, which means one thing. It means the 100 mission deal didn't apply to you. You have a 1-year tour.
But you were still flying.
Oh, yeah.
This was more
well,
like
I was part of a crew, yeah.
It's more like a collateral
No,
duty,
see,
really.
The weasels, when you go to school, in the weasel school, what it was is you had a week. You had X number of pilots and X number of EWOs. And you had 1 week to team up. And you will never fly with anybody else unless one of you gets killed. And that's the way it worked.
Okay, you flew 112 combat missions.
Mhm.
Anything stand out among those? Anything?
Yeah, a number of them.
What was the most, like the number one thing that you remember the most? Which mission?
We were in a time when they had called a bombing halt. And so that meant we were going to be in there single ship or dual, just watching the RF-4Es, or the RF-4 recce birds, the photo birds, to make sure that we could watch, make sure they were not shooting SAMs. The rule at that time, when you had the bombing halt, you couldn't shoot at anything unless it shot at you first, okay? But we were sent in there to protect the F-4s from the missiles, not the guns. And we had a flight of 2 F-4 photo birds flying in North Vietnam, and one got shot down.
During the
And-
halt?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and there was nothing we could do about it. It wasn't a missile, because they had to come in low level, and they got, I think he was ZPU-22s got him. And, you know, there's no more frightening sound when you're flying up there than to hear whoop, whoop, whoop. That meant somebody's in a chute.
It's a lock on, right?
Well, no, that's the sound of the beacon in this parachute. coming on guard. And it's just.
Oh, the guy that
whoop,
already,
Whoop, whoop.
guy that already bailed out, yeah.
Yeah, they both had
Punched
bailed
out.
out.
He punched out and you're hearing there, whoop, whoop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying. When you hear that sound, you know there's a problem. We immediately got tapped for ResCap,
Which is,
rescue cap. We're gonna cover the, stay in the air to make sure that nothing can come in there. And if there's anything we can do to take care of the ground, we had a Gatling gun yet. And we could do whatever we can do to protect the helicopters that would fly in to try and
I was
rescue.
gonna say, is there any way you can get a Jolly Green in there to get the guy?
Yeah, but that was not possible. Where we were, there was no Jolly Green going to be able to get in there.
Too far up?
Yeah, and it was too close to the city or where the people were.
Right.
Because, in the bombing hole, as I said, when we flew in there normally, we never saw anybody, anything, nothing moving, never saw a truck or anything because of the altitude we were flying. We weren't forward air controlled flights. We were in there for targets. And so there were bound to be a ton of farmers because they were like ants all over the place. And we knew they were going to be captured if they survived the departure from the airplane. So we got tapped. Like I said, Crown said, okay, you'll stay in the area. We need you to be ResCap. And of course, now we're getting a little bit excited because fuel's going and we're a long way from Karat and we don't usually land other places unless we have to.
You gotta really watch your fuel at this point.
Oh, you bet. Well, there's no 135 going to come where we were. So they called this Marine 130 and they, tankers. Now, one thing about the Thud, it has two types of refueling. It has a slipway door for the probe in a normal tanker. And it also has another door that opens up and out comes a probe.
Where is that located on the bridge?
It's on the left front in the nose of the Thud. Yeah, a door opens and up pops this probe. So now that 130 is going to have a basket. So you can take that probe, insert it in the basket, and get refueled. Thank God. So.
I hope the pilot had lots of practice at doing that.
Oh, the Marines. We love those guys. They would do anything. Just crazy stuff.
I mean, you're a pilot though, too.
Oh yeah, well we were insane. We always flunked our insanity for a number of missions. But anyway, we knew that. They said, well, other stories. Anyway, so we were able to hook up with that tanker and stay in there as long as we had to and finally get back to Karat. That was one. Another was when another one of our wingmen got shot down. That is terrifying because those guys. And one died, didn't make it out of he died in the ejection. And the other one ended up at POW. But then there was one night, we were what we would call a Ryan Raider mission.
What was that?
That night, low-level single ship. And you target practice during the day when you're up there trolling, trying to get the SAMs to fire at you, and you fly against the target you're going to do that night just to see what the radar image is going to be because, remember, like I said, you're doing TFR, and the karsts are such that you change the heading in 1/10 of 1 degree, and that picture is different. It's not like you studied. You have to really be on that heading that night. So we were going up and we said, okay, we had, I think we were carrying 6 500-pound bombs on the turret underneath. And
No bombing hold at this time then, huh?
no. And so we have our target and we're heading right into it and I've got it lined up right and I get to have the pickle button that releases bombs. The interesting thing about Thud, whenever those bombs leave the airplane, it goes boom, boom. That's a nuclear bomber. It has a bomb bay. We had a tank in it, but whenever the bomb's left, by virtue of that sound, where it ever came from, I never even researched it. But, so, we let the bombs go, and the sky lit up, and I counted 50 airplanes. We weren't alone. And they were all dropping about the same time. That fire was so big, when we headed it out of Laos into Thailand, you could see the fire. It was that big.
Where did you hit? What part of North Vietnam?
We hit a transition point for them. They were moving all their weapons and cargo and stuff, and we hit it dead on. And everybody in that flight got a DFC.
Is that how you got your DFC?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me what other combat decorations you got.
Well, I have a ton of air medals. I have like 13 air medals, and DFC, and you know,
What's that you got around your neck there?
this is from the military or the World Wars. I'm the commander of the local chapter.
Okay.
Plus, I'm on the staff for the youth leadership conferences. But that's what that's all about.
Okay.
But
What's the highest decoration you received in combat?
DFC
DFC.
in combat.
Okay.
But then I have a Legion of Merit, which is the only other medal in the Air Force that you can wear a ribbon around your neck other than the Medal of Honor.
All right. But you're not wearing that right now.
No,
Okay.
no, we just wear it as it's a regular medal.
Okay.
But I'll show you my shadow
Yeah.
box with all those medals in it.
Right, right.
Yeah. No, that tour in Vietnam was interesting because now, during that tour, I got connected back again, even though I knew what my assignment was after that. The day I arrived, I knew my assignment after Weasels, so long as I survived. We had a 35% probability of survival. They said, you have to quit smoking because it's not good for your health. And everybody laughed. We're going to die of lung cancer when you're 35% probability you're going to even be alive at the end of this tour? You kidding me?
Those odds were about like B-17s in World War II, weren't they? I mean, just, you know,
Theirs probably worse.
yours was worse or theirs was worse?
No, theirs were worse.
That's right, they had like 25%.
Oh, it's, yeah, it was
25%
horrible.
loss every time they went out, so.
Yeah. But the other one was, we'd go at the bar and the flight surgeon came in and said, you gotta stop drinking gin. You gotta stop drinking gin. Why? It's affecting your brain. Really? You're in a Weasel program and you don't think your brain's affected already? You had to be insane to start with.
That's it. So your psyche would be affected, yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
you know, crazy things
Yeah.
people do. But no, it was a great tour. But while I was there, they brought in a special project, and I got to lead it. And the contractor that was doing the equipment were from E-Systems, Greenville, Texas, Big Safari.
Okay,
So I reconnect. I knew those guys, so
yeah, right.
we reconnected.
Was that gonna be your next assignment when you got?
Oh
got
yeah,
back?
not Greenville, but Big Safari.
Where
Yeah,
was the
when
big-
we left there, why no one could understand how would I already have my assignment before I even, just checked in. I said, well, that's the spooky world I came from, so I'm going back. And we went to Fort Worth, Texas. Big Safari had a big operation there with General Dynamics. And if you drove into the plant now, straight in, that plant's a mile long, by the way. There's a great big hangar right at the end of that drive, and that was our hangar. And that's where the RB-57Fs were built too.
Can you talk anything about all that?
Yeah, Big Safari was a amazing world. Here by then I'm a captain, and
This would be 1968 by this time, right?
actually 69.
69, okay.
Yeah, January '69, about then. And I really got to find out how the system works. We had our own set of regulations. 6622 is the Air Force reg that guided what we could do. And we could do up to class 5 bonds on airplanes. And there's various classes, which means you couldn't create anything brand new with an airplane. You couldn't build a brand new airplane, but you could modify airplanes. So before I even got there, they had this mission to create an airplane that could loiter in the same environment as an SR-71 and a U-2, and carry the same payload, 2,000 pounds. And so the folks in Big Safari worked with General Dynamics, and they identified a B-57 bomber as the airplane that would be modified. So they took the nose off right after the cockpit, took the wings off, and they had the basic operation of the airplane. Built new wings, new fuselage, front and back, And this airplane was to fly above 68,000 feet and do the same mission, the SR or the U-2, except be able to stay there longer.
Now, what was your role in all this?
Well, in that airplane, I was just really a crew member responsible for some of the mission equipment. So we did all the test flights on it.
Stay on the ground plus test flights. You didn't go on any of the actual missions then?
No, I didn't have to go on any missions, but then the airplanes became part of my responsibility. But in order to fly the airplane, I had to go down to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida and go into a special chamber they built for the astronauts to 100,000 feet. So I was wearing, that's why the picture I sent you.
Space
was me
suit,
and-
space
yeah.
helmet and all that.
I
yeah.
wore the whole thing, and that's a two-man chamber, and that was exciting. Let me tell you, if you had claustrophobia, that's not your business. You don't want to do that. The chamber was just big enough for two people, and in order to go to the chamber and active and go to the altitude, you had to sit in the chamber in the suit and suck 100% oxygen for 1 hour. And of course, the astronauts did away with that eventually, but we were sucking 100% oxygen for 1 hour. Then they closed the chamber and off you go. And the gloves were really interesting. I mean, you had special boots, gloves, the suit, the helmet, the whole nine, the fishbowl thing. And the gloves, your fingers were like this in the gloves because they had metal bands.
Right.
And the reason why is if that suit inflated, there's two things going to happen. If you didn't have this cord that was tied to your neck ring to your crotch tight, that ring was going right over your head, take your nose off, and the helmet would be up there and you're down inside the suit.
Okay.
So you made damn sure that kept tight. The other thing is, if your fingers didn't have those bands, they would go like this. You can't fly an airplane with like a paddle.
Right.
Okay? So they bent the fingers like this.
Okay, so this is a chamber that's taking you up to 100,000 feet,
Yeah.
and you'd be on 100% oxygen for an hour before you did that.
Right. And during the time you're in there.
Well, what was that like?
Well, the 100% is disturbing, especially when you're done, because you can't sleep. You're tired, but you can't sleep, because if you do, you lose both eardrums. You got to get that nitrogen back into your system in the right relationship.
Did they help you with that?
Yeah, it's called stay awake.
Okay.
There's nothing they can do. I mean, you just have to, your system just has to work on its own. You just have to stay awake and let it work. You're constantly popping your ears on Valsalva as that oxygen gets,
What would
gets
it
out
feel
there.
like at 100,000 feet? Or a simulation of 100,000 feet?
You don't really think about it, yeah. I love flying that airplane because it was so stable and that. What we do at Fort Worth when we had a test flight, we had 4 engines. J-57s on pylons outside, or below the wings, and TF-33s in the wing roots. And those huge inlets. And you'd sit at the end of the runway and push it balls to the wall and release, and halfway down the field you just go on nose up to 50,000 feet,
How high did you actually fly in that?
over 68.
68.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
But
once they
flying the airplane was great. Thank God we had a camera in the nose, because the nose was so long you couldn't see anything. So we had a camera that you could lower and see what's going on for landing and stuff like that.
Right. Now, when this B-57 reconfigured, what was that airplane called?
RB-57F.
RB-57F.
Yeah. It was a Class 5 mod.
And you actually flew in it
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is, we used to have a lot of fun with the tower, because when you do that midfield, you got half the runway yet.
A lot of power.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the FAA took care of that. They said enough of that stuff. We're gonna change the TCA, so you can only go to 35,000 feet.
How long were you doing all this before you transferred to your next assignment?
How long was I doing that? Oh, geez. Well, that wasn't the most exciting thing I did at GD Fort Worth.
What else?
my first assignment, my first project was called Rivet Kite. And these were 3 airplanes that we were going to configure with Sanders. Sanders was a big Navy contractor, and they were really good at SIGINT stuff, signal intelligence, comment. And so they had designed this system that was totally automatic, had like 4 operators in this airplane, and they would go out and collect in, communications intelligence type stuff with those. And that was my first project. Well, they had a little problem with Sanders, because Sanders, for some reason, they wouldn't let the Air Force crews in to maintain the airplanes. We had to have those airplanes fly every now and then while they're being modified to keep them current. So we'd get guys in the Pentagon that back then you still had a monthly firing requirement. So we'd get guys in the Pentagon, some colonels, and send them up to Nashville, New Hampshire, and to fly the airplanes. And they got a little bit of a problem with Sanders. So I'm a captain. I think they felt that I was fodder, so who cares? So they sent me up, and as I found out, there was a reason for them doing this. They were testing me. They sent me up to Sanders to solve the problem, so we wouldn't have that problem anymore with Sanders.
Did you solve it?
Oh, yeah. Well, they sent me up with a chief master sergeant to keep me out of trouble. And he and I became great friends because he was my assistant. So anyway, off we go to Sanders, and we arrive to Nashville and get our motel and our car and everything. And Howie Marsh was my assistant. He said, "What are we going to do now?" I says, "I'm going to wait till about 2 o'clock." He says, "In the afternoon?" That's kind of late. He says, "Oh no, 2 in the morning." "And what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to call Doc Sanders at home." He says, "I'm listening." I said, "Well, I figured I'll get his attention. I won't have to go through a secretary. And then I'm going to explain to him what I'm going to do the next day if I don't get into the hangar." Because they weren't letting anybody in.
What'd you say you were gonna do?
I was going to rent a bulldozer, and I would be at his operation at 7:30. Whether he's there or not, I don't know. And if I can't get in the door, I'm going to come in the door. Now you can guess how I'm going to do that. And he said, "You're really going to do that?" He says, "Why not?
Did you
That's
call
one
him
way
at
of solving the problem."
Did you call him at 2 in the morning?
I did.
How'd that go?
It went very well. The next morning, I had no trouble. Of course, I didn't go near any bulldozer.
No, because he said he'd open it up for you, right?
Yeah, he said, "Well, I'll see you in the morning." I said, "Yeah, we just got in town, and I wanted to make sure you knew I was here." The word spreads real quick.
He knew what you were there for.
Well, he knew darn well that I had the authority to cancel his contract. And if I didn't get in the building, I had the authority to remove the airplanes. So I didn't have to remind him. He knew exactly all that stuff. So he and I became great friends.
All right, so
And
it
when
worked.
we were flying this airplane, I read the contract, and I was so impressed with the system. Now I'm an electronics engineer. I had all the algorithms, still do. It was amazing what this thing was going to do. So he said, "Well,
Which
how you gonna-"
aircraft was this now?
Huh?
Which aircraft was this?
This was a T-29 airplane. It's really a Convair two-engine airplane. It was usually just used for executive flying,
Right.
But we had them over in Germany. Actually, 2 airplanes across the line. We had 3 in Germany. That's the one that I was telling about with the major in the back seat.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, we lost one day. It took off. We warned the pilots, if you have any suspicion that there's an engine problem, do not take off. That airplane will crash, guaranteed,
So it won't fly on one
because
engine.
it will not fly on one engine. And they ignored, and they took off from Wiesbaden, and the engine failed, and they came right around and crash landed on a farmer's field. Now, there's a covert airplane on a farmer's field. We sent the APs over there.
I bet you got over there in a
swarmed
hurry,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, that airplane ended up in the ocean.
All right, after Fort Worth, where'd you go next?
Fort Worth, they decided to close that down. Like I said, now, there's one other story you gotta have in Fort Worth.
Okay, go
It's
ahead.
big time,
Right.
because I'm delivering one of the C-97s in Europe just got into Wiesbaden and was briefing them on some new stuff we put on it. And I got a call from the Pentagon that I had to get back immediately. And so, see, what I did when I was in Germany the first time is I linked up with a guy named Pat O'Malley. He was a colonel, and he knew what I was doing over there. And he created the link that enabled me to go direct to the Pentagon from where I was in a squadron with the blessings of the wing commander. I'm jumping right over a major comm, right to the Pentagon.
I was a captain.
As the captain. And thanks to the sergeant set this up. And we linked up, and he said, when you get done with that tour, we want you in the program. I had my orders already. So that's how I got into Big Safari. He was my sponsor, okay? And we had a long life together. But anyway, so had that call from the Pentagon to get home right away. You had to go to Omaha. I said, oh my, SAC. What am I going to do at SAC? You're going to take over the big team airplane fleet. Really? I'm a captain. I'm going to SAC headquarters to tell those guys we now own their airplanes? Are you kidding me? I said, get home. So I went back to Fort Worth, and I called Brett Martin, who is my guy in Oklahoma City. We had individuals in each of the depots because they were the SMs, the system managers for these airplanes. And this guy was in charge of the C-135s. And he and I had worked together, and I just called him Uncle Brett. So I called Uncle Brett and I said, Brett, you got to meet me in Omaha. I said, I know about that. I said, yeah, but I'm not going there alone. You're going with me.
Now, what rank was Uncle Brett?
He's a civilian,
Oh.
probably GS-15. But
But he could help you.
oh, well,
Yeah.
they knew him. They trusted him. They didn't know me from Adam. So we met in Omaha and went out to the base in quarters and went to the club for dinner. And honest to God, when we went in that room in the officers club, the tables around us moved. They didn't want anything to do with it. They knew who we were, and they went, they were gone. Went to the bar to have drinks, the bar cleared. I told Brett, I said, sounds like we're really welcome up here. And so the next day, we had a meeting set up in one of the big staff meetings in there, and we had probably 10 people in there. I was at one end of the table, Britt Martin was over here, and all the rest of these guys, the guy at the end was a SAC colonel. I'm a captain. And all these guys, majors, lieutenant colonels, were all. And I finally said, okay, I guess this meeting is one I called. And how do you want the good news or the bad news? They said, well, we want the bad news first. I said, I don't have any. And they looked at me like I was weird. And they said, do you want the good news? I said, and they said, yes. I said, okay. First of all, does everybody have a pad of paper and a pen? No. I'll let you have a few minutes to go get one. I'm captain talking to all these majors and colonels.
Colonels, yeah.
And they all went and got a pad of paper and said, what's this all about? I said, well, that's the good news. We are redesigning your fleet of airplanes right now. That's not been working. You've not been happy with it. It was built by ESL and it was a piece of junk.
What were they flying?
They were flying Recce Birds.
What's that?
Those were Eland airplanes with some comment in them. And they were flying collection flights all over the world.
What's a Recce Bird?
Reconnaissance.
Oh, okay, like you guys were doing.
Electronic reconnaissance
Okay.
and that stuff, yeah.
Right.
And so I said, we're gonna redesign that fleet right now. Now, here's the change in the game. I'm not gonna tell you what we're gonna give you. I want you to tell me what you need. And that blew their minds. I said, you're serious? I said, yeah, we're tired of telling you what you need. Obviously, we can't satisfy it. So why don't you tell us what it is you need? And we'll go together and find the equipment to make it work.
How'd that work out?
Unbelievable. I could have written anything I wanted and Zach would have signed it. Because that's the way it was. We had one problem with an airplane. When we delivered the first airplane, we didn't do the nose right. Because now on this this is Combat Sense. You can see, I'll send you pictures of that one. It's got special wingtips, an extended tail, and a nose, radar, so that those are all collection antennas away from the airplane. So you had 360 degrees coverage with no interference, like there was nothing in the middle. And that was very important to get precision measurements. And it was called a Power Pattern Measurement System, PPMS. And it was really a follow-on to a system we were using in Germany, except this was far more sophisticated.
Okay.
And that company I got really tight with. They were ITT Gilfillan up here. And I'll
This is
say-
still out of Fort Worth that you were doing all this, or?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, as a captain.
all right.
So
okay.
I was responsible for those airplanes. We were gonna build 3 of them. And so I got that stuff from SAC and I made them part of my team. And then when we were gonna do the flying and training, I called SAC Stan Oval and said, and I knew the guys there because they were with me at Mather. And I said, I need a team of 4 of your guys or whatever you think to go through the manuals to make sure the manuals are exactly what it is you want in there to the point you guys write the manuals. They've never been asked to do that. They've all shoved that stuff down their throat. And I said, and I'll pay your TDY for 2 months to come out and do it. And they did. And so we delivered the first airplane, and we had a little trouble with the way the nose radome worked. It wasn't really good enough because what was happening, we did tough tests. You know what a tough test is?
No,
That's when you put little strings on the airplane around an area, and you fly it, and you shoot pictures of where those strings are flowing. You can see where the airflow is, and some of them, when they curl up, you've got to change it because it should be smooth.
right.
Okay, so we did that out here in San Diego at General Dynamics Wind Tunnel. Well, we delivered the airplane and it had a problem, and the problem was the airflow was disconnecting from that radome, coming down and coming back up, and it was damaging the nose gear door. Well, that's not a good idea because obviously it's going to do some damage. You're never going to get the gear either down or up. It'll jam. Now you got a real problem. So they called me and said, we got a problem. I said, fine. So I flew up to Omaha and met with this colonel who was chief of maintenance for SAC. And he said, well, I said, well, could I go out and see the airplane and see what's going on? And they sent a lieutenant colonel out, still a captain. They sent me out, and I looked at the airplane one time and I says, okay. Went back, talked to the colonel, and I picked it. Do you mind if I use your phone? He said, no problem. I picked up the phone and I called Brett Martin at Oklahoma City. I said, I need clearance for a one-time flight. This airplane is grounded as of this day, except for that one-time flight back to Fort Worth. And the colonel looked at me and said, what the hell? Who gave you that authority? Well, it's my airplane. And as a captain in Big Safari, you had full control.
Okay.
So I brought in a crew, flew it down to Fort Worth and fixed it.
All right.
So,
We gotta move on to your next assignment now.
yeah. Okay, well, then I moved to, after that, and I had a bunch of others. But anyway, I took over that 10 airplane fleet.
All right.
That was a big job. So then I moved to Greenville, Texas, which was, we were closing down Det 1, Fort Worth, Texas. So we had to move the airplanes over to Greenville. So the powers that be in Wright Pat decided that they ought to send my 135s out here to Ontario, to Lockheed. And I did not, I was a major now. I didn't like that. I thought that was stupid. So I wrote him a 7-page letter, which I still have a copy of, telling them exactly how they ought to handle this. Oak City was the depot for the 135s. Greenville is like a 3-hour drive. We had 130s. Why don't you send the 130s to the people that know best? That's Lockheed. Put the 135s in Oak City, and we're close to General Dynamics and everybody else that needs to know because they're the ones that have all the smarts about all these airplanes. Well, the error I made was I sent this to the headquarters and I infoed the general, who was the 1-star that we worked for, without telling him where it went. I got a letter of reprimand that lasted about 4 hours. Pat O'Malley had been assigned to Korea running a Recce B-57 program. His tour had ended. He had now come back, and he was going to be in charge of Dayton. which is where the headquarters was for Big Safari. And so I was advised that I was getting a letter of reprimand because I did that. And by the way, the general sided with me and changed the decision, which was the
Okay.
smartest thing he
Well,
ever
that's
did in his
good,
life.
yeah.
Okay? And they were pissed, headquarters, let me tell you. They were out to get me. I said, I didn't care. I'd already gone to Oak City and had a job lined up if I got fired. So I got a phone call at midnight. Mary answered the phone, and it was my former boss, Jinx Johnson, who was the guy that made that decision, or was part of it. And his comment to Mary, after she told him to go to hell, was, what are you guys doing? It's midnight. We're sitting there having a glass of wine. And he said, well, don't go anywhere for the next half hour. That was going to be a challenge. So we did.
At midnight? Where are we gonna go? Yeah.
So I said, okay. So I hung up, and I looked at Mary and I said, O'Malley's back in town, and we're moving to Greenville. He picked up the phone. He says, would you get your ass in airplanes over to Greenville now? So I moved to Greenville. That's my sponsor again.
All right, so this is just an extension of Fort Worth then, really, is what it is.
Another detachment.
Yeah, another detachment.
Yeah, we had 3 detachments then. We grew to 5. We had another one before, which
But
was.
you're basically doing the same thing in Greenville, right?
Yeah, yeah, I took my airplanes over there to set them up for them to do it. I was supposed to go to command and staff school, but I told Pat O'Malley, I said, hey, I can't go there now. Let me get in the next class. By then I'll set up what's going on here, because I'm moving a bunch of airplanes that are pretty big, and it tripled the workload over there.
Did it happen that way?
Yeah,
Okay, and then, so you went to command and staff
yeah, I
school.
went to command and staff.
Where was
after-
that located?
That was in Montgomery, Alabama.
About what year was this by this time?
That had to be, let's see, I was in the class of 74.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long you stay there?
That was a 1-year program.
1 year program?
And I got my MBA while I was there at Auburn.
Auburn.
Auburn had a campus there
okay.
at Maxwell.
So after that, did you get promoted or?
Yeah, well, from there I went back to the headquarters, Big Safari, in Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
And while I was there, I made lieutenant colonel. And the Air Force at that time had a program called, what the heck was it? Professional Pro, or Professional something or other. And then they made it something exec. And what it was they were picking up brand new lieutenant colonels who had experience in industry and this sort of thing to take over command of certain units.
Mhm.
And one of the guys I had been assigned with in Fort Worth was Lieutenant Colonel Billy McLeod. And he knew me quite well. I only got the tough jobs in Big Safari. Only the tough ones, and they never went bad. So he said, look, either you submit your name or I will for you to this program. And so I made the call to personnel in Randolph and said, put my name in for this. Didn't talk to my boss. This is because I knew he would say, no, you can't do that. He wouldn't let me out of his sight. And he and I were good personal friends. We did some crazy stuff in the world together. So I did, and they came back and said, okay, you're gonna have a phone call with this colonel in Chicago, and then let us know how that call goes. I said, okay. I was an Army colonel, and it turns out he was the region commander for DCAS out of DLA. DLA is Defense Logistics Agency. DCAS was Defense Contract Administrative Services, and they ran offices in all the major aerospace companies, Boeing, General Dynamics, all over the place. And that included an office in Indianapolis, which was Detroit Diesel Allison. 10 plants, General Motors, all government contracts. They built all the Army transmissions, the Detroit diesel part of it, including what eventually was the M1 tank. And they had, Allison also was making jet engines, and they did the A7 engines.
Did you get the Indianapolis office?
Yeah. Well, I had that interview with that colonel, and boy, he made a deal I couldn't turn down. After we talked for a while and he found out, you know, I listened to what I was saying about what I was doing and all this stuff, he said, tell you what I'll do. You accept this assignment in Indianapolis, take over to Castro, Allison, and you'll be an 06 when you leave there in 3 years.
Did it work out that way?
Damn right. And I had a staff of about 50 people, and they were marvelous.
06
And we
being
had
full colonel, like,
$1.3 billion worth of business for the government.
so you're a general manager at this point, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you did. You
And
handled
I used to
everything.
play racquetball with the VP GM General Motors guy.
So by this,
He was a Marine helicopter pilot,
wow,
and he taught us all about what was the name of the place down there in down the Carolinas?
oh,
Topsail Beach, right outside the Navy base there.
uh-huh,
And he said, you got to go down there. So we went down there 2 or 3 times. It was so really great. Yeah, he and I used to play racquetball all the time.
now how long did you stay there in that position?
3 years.
Okay, and then you made, full colonel?
Made colonel.
Okay,
Yeah, it was kind of funny because.
so what year is this by this time?
This was 1980.
1980, so
Yeah.
you have 4 more years left in your career, and you're a full
Well,
colonel.
no, I had more than, well, that's tradition, but
No, that's what ended up happening though, right? You
yeah.
retired.
Well, we
right?
selected that.
Yeah,
Yeah, because then I was sent back to Washington from personnel, Air Force personnel, when I went down to find out what they wanted me to do. And they said, we want you to go to Andrews and look this organization over and tell us, will you take that assignment? And it was the commander of WACC, Washington Area Contracting Center, which was the forerunner of the Air Force District of Washington. So I had all of Washington. That meant the Pentagon, the White House, half of Fort Myers. I had, what was the name of the base across in the Pentagon? Anyway,
Was
that
it-
one.
was this logistics? Is that what you were
Yeah,
doing?
yeah, I was.
You're responsible
writing
for the
off
logistics
all
for
the
all those
contracts.
places? Yeah, all the
Yeah.
civilian contracts for those places.
Well, all the government contracts, but it was all, including the Pentagon, everything they wanted, you know,
Okay,
on the Air Force side.
and that was your sunset assignment then, right? That was the last one.
At
you-
that time, I didn't think that, but.
You
yeah,
didn't know
when-
that, but that was
When the
it.
end, when the end came, you know, we were about ready to move. My assignment was going to be the region commander in Boston for DCAS again.
But you decided to retire instead?
Yeah, Mary says it snows in Boston, so we decided to retire. But now, see, what's happening on the other side, the big safari stuff, I said, ITT Gilfillan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I helped them build such a capability. California Microwave bought them and wanted to create a new division, okay? This started when we were first in Indianapolis. So some senior, the vice president and president of CMI would come to visit me in Indianapolis and say, we want you to retire and come and take this over. And I said I wasn't ready to retire. I didn't want to retire before I made at least 06. So we wangled a deal with the Air Force that I could come out here on weekends. They said the weekends are yours. So I flew out here on Friday night and came home on Sunday, and I worked with them for 3 years, helping build that division. So whenever I went to Washington, they were still after me. So when we just decided that going to Boston was what we wanted to do. And there
And
was
you had a
little-
job waiting for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so, you know, there was no reason to do that, because I looked around and talked to everybody about the possibility of making a star, and I was so far out of the system then, I'm over in DLA, not in the Air Force,
Right,
that, yeah, you know,
right,
so I said,
right.
hell with it, I did well.
Okay, so what was your actual retirement date?
It was, we did, I think I put that on that sheet, it was in April,
April 1984, right?
yeah.
Okay, and then you
Yeah.
had the civilian job waiting for you
Yeah,
right
so-
after that.
When we retired, well, we had a big ceremony. Typically in Washington, when you're a colonel and you retire, it's a gang affair in the Pentagon. One-on-one, because I had the stature. And we did it in the presidential hangar at Andrews Air Force Base. You probably saw that picture when Reagan was president, huge American flag that's hanging in there, right in front of that. I had the Air Force Drum and Bugle Corps, because they were one of my customers. It was a 2-day affair. We did the ceremony one day, and was picked up in a limo, brought in a red carpet in the hangar. I got the, we did all the ceremony stuff. I made my farewell speech, and
Hope you got a lot of pictures, video and pictures and
I
all
have
that.
2 volumes that
All right.
my stuff there did it.
Now, let me go back for a minute, because I missed
Yeah.
asking you this before. When you were in Karat, some questions I gotta ask you about that. Did you develop any friendships while you were there that lasted?
Oh yeah, well right now I'm number 412, was it 424 or something, Weasel. They're in the 2000s now, but yeah, we stayed together as the Weasels.
So you
As a
have
matter of
regular
fact-
reunions, and you're staying in touch with some people and
Yeah,
some
we have
close friends?
reunions. We have
Yeah.
reunions every year.
Right.
And one year I went to the reunion and I'm sitting there and I'm listening to what they're saying and say, well, yeah, we got to think about filing our taxes. And I listened and they said, have you done it? They've been in business for 3 years. They hadn't done anything. And I said, guys, you're really not a 501c3. They said, oh yeah, we are. I said, no, you're not. I already checked. And the reason was they incorporated here in California, okay? They moved the operation to Washington, D.C. You don't retain that 501c3 that way because your letter of determination has to be refiled. They never did. So I redid that for them. And they made me the Weasel of the Year. And I have a trophy that I'll show you.
All right. How'd you stay in touch with your family and friends when you were in Karat? Your wife? and-
The only way we
wife and
had
daughter
was
and,
Mars. Mars is the military affiliate radio system, and I was a ham radio operator anyway. Had my own rig and my hooch, but you could go there and go through the ham radio system. And Barry Goldwater had a system in Phoenix, and if you could contact that place, they'd make a call anywhere in the country free.
All right. That's
Other
very
than
good. So you
that,
actually got
you'd have to schedule a
Yeah.
call, and
You got to talk to your family while you were there. That's good. You didn't necessarily have to rely on FBO San Francisco then, with those letters that we had to send.
yeah.
What'd you do for
Well,
rent?
we had recorders,
Yeah.
so I would record a message.
Record and mail it. Yeah.
And you know what happens? You get the second one. It says, now everything's okay now. How it starts. You missed the first radio.
Well, that's good. They didn't know there was anything wrong to start with.
Yeah,
All
there
right.
was.
What'd you do for recreation over there in Karat?
Played racquetball.
That's not bad. Keep you in
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Now you're a career Air Force, so I guess when you got back and you had all these great assignments and you were moving up the ladder and all that kind of stuff, you probably didn't think too much about the war when you got back, did you?
Oh yeah.
You
Well, we were still doing stuff to help them. We were
Right.
you
So
know,
it's just a
making special airplanes to do their.
just a continuation, only stateside. So, I mean, you probably didn't have a lot of time to think about all the close calls you got into or any of that kind of stuff because you're busy doing other things. So.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I kept a log.
Yeah. Okay. I need you to summarize your activities after you're retired, and I know that's hard to do because you've been involved in so many things. Maybe you can
I
kind of
still
list.
am.
Yeah, maybe you can kind of list off some of the stuff you did. You had that job,
Well,
the civilian job. How long did that last?
I was with California Micro for 3 years. We got into the drone business, and it got very complex. We ended up having $1 billion proposal I put together for the Army.
What did you do for them? Were you a manager or
I was VP GM,
VP?
Vice President General Manager.
General Manager,
Yeah,
okay,
I was
yeah.
General Manager of that, and then I became one of the Vice Presidents.
Now, why did you leave there? It sounded like a good job.
I got tired of it.
Okay.
I got tired. It was just a lot of work, and I never could see where it was going to go to the next step.
Okay.
I said, "To hell with it," so I quit.
Okay. So what'd you do then?
And then I went on my own and did some consulting. And one day I got a call from this gal who was a recruiter and said, I have an appointment for you at this address at this time tomorrow. It's okay. It was in Westlake Village at a company called American Nucleonics. So I walked in there and I sat down with a guy called Bill Foley. He was the president of the company. And we sat down and started talking, and it turns out that he and I had been working projects together for years, except he was over here and I was over there and it was happening, okay? And he created a very special technology that was very important to Big Safari. So he was one of the major customers for us.
You went to work for him?
And he said, I want you to be a consultant with us. And I said, fine. So I did. And
It's a
about
paying
month,
job, right?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
And a month later, he says, you know, you're not around here long enough. You need to be around here more. That's your office. What are we going to call you? A vice president of something. What it was going to be? We had one company where we had a vice president of stuff, and I said, no, I don't want to be that. So he made me vice president of programs and development.
Okay, sounds like a good title.
And so I became a member of the North Ranch Country Club and got paid a lot of money, and we did a lot of big stuff.
Now, where did you actually move to Thousand Oaks?
We moved to Thousand Oaks in '84 into this house.
Okay, so then when you were in
Well,
Westlake
it's-
working for this guy, you were here in this house.
It was my CFO when I was VPGM of California Microwave that said, don't even think about the valley. I'll get you your own real estate agent and she'll find you a house. I had no idea what this was. So he introduced me to this real estate agent and we got along tremendously well, and she took me around a lot of places and then finally showed me this one, and it's quite a bit different than when we bought it. But I fell in love with this place, so I called Mary and said, you gotta come out and see this. So we flew her out and looked at, and that was it.
Right.
I've been here for 35 years.
Now, this next job that you had over there in Westlake with this
Yeah.
gentleman that you knew, but you didn't know you knew him,
Yeah.
how long did that last?
That lasted for 3 years, and that we left there because the company sold.
Okay,
A big company, AIL, bought them back east, and of course, if AIL had done their homework, they'd have known I was not on their list of good guys, because I'd killed their program in Omaha.
so what'd you do next?
Okay, after that, I got together with another group of guys that I had met. They were engineers, and we wrote a couple of books on management and management procedures.
Now, was this volunteer or was this?
Oh yeah, this is fun.
It's all
We're
volunteer work from
Yeah,
here
we're
on.
just getting together as guys. We
From
were,
here on in, this was all volunteer.
well, not really. Then I eventually went to work for California, CMTC, California Manufacturing Technology Center. Was down in Torrance.
So that's a paying job.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I was paying. I created a financial program.
How long did you
But-
stay there?
I stayed there about 3 years, and that was funded by NIST. You know, that's the National Institute of Technology back in Washington. And so we had a lot of programs with industry teaching them how to improve their processes and all kinds of stuff.
That's a lot of commuting back and forth to Torrance, so did you have to go there every day?
No, the office was there. My office was here, and I was working in industry all over the place. And I lined up with one company that is a world-class biological supply house as a client then. And after I left CMTC, I became the chairman of their board. And then it was a family-owned business, and the lawyers and I decided that that shouldn't be. We need the family to run that. And so I was made the chairman of their executive committee, and I taught them how to have their board meetings with the 3 members of the family, and then I wrote all the proclamations and everything, and they would process that, and then, you know, and I've been with them ever since. And
So-
I'm still doing their stuff.
Is that a volunteer
I do-
job or a paying job?
That's a paying job. I do their financial projections every year.
Okay, so you're still working then?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
And
Well,
you do
I'm-
volunteer work also though, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm also the treasurer of the Air Warrior Courage Foundation. That's a paying job too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I've got, you saw the organizations that I belong to.
Yeah, you
And
can,
I'm
you just,
the chair of the Life Members Group for the IEEE. For our
IEEE,
section,
what's that?
Institute of Electronics and Electrical Engineers.
Okay.
I'm a life member, which
These are all the
means-
volunteer things you do, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a life member, been a member of them since 1956. There's nobody in California who's been a member that long. To be in LMAG, which is Life Member Affiliate Group, you have to have a total of 100 That's your age plus your years as a member of the IEEE. Nobody has a higher number on
Now, you got one daughter and no grandchildren, right?
here. Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what does your daughter do?
She is, she works for Wells Fargo on the IT side.
Okay.
And they handle all the software and the systems for Wells Fargo. Her headquarters is in Iowa, and her office is 2 blocks from here,
That's great.
in her house.
So she lives nearby.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay, I'll ask you some questions, looking back on your time in Karat. How'd your wartime experiences affect your life?
Oh, I thought it was amazing. There's no negatives in there at all. It's just, it proves that what needs to be done can be done, and it also proved that we had the worst president in the world at the time. We won that war so many times, it was pathetic.
I
And you
agree.
know the books.
I know,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
it's just,
A Better War is the
stupid.
name of the book that will
Yeah.
tell you how many times we won it. I gave you that reference, maybe you read it.
yeah, not yet, yeah.
Okay. What are some life lessons you learned from military service?
Oh, I think that's wonderful. You know, I teach this leadership program for the high school sophomores and juniors. We don't infer the military, but they can tell. And a lot of them are junior ROTC students. But being able to do what you can do, you know, the Army has this expression, be all you can be, and they mean it. And the Air Force is the same way. I can't speak for the Navy, but, but it's just having the opportunity as a lieutenant and a captain to do the things I did. There's no way. Anyone that had a career that said you graduated from college as an engineer and you spent your life being an engineer, how can you argue with that? And make it the way you want it, and not say, well, no, you have to fill this form out and do that and that and that. No. They said, here's a project, make it happen.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and military in general?
Oh, I'm very favorable to the military. I think we need it stronger, and if I had to say, everybody would serve at least 2 years. And I think it would change this country immensely.
I agree.
Not from being a bitter world, it would be an understanding world that says, I know a lot more about me and my life now having served. My brother was in the Air Force also, and it shows on that too.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview? Somebody might look at your video 50 years from now.
I think the message I would like to see is that can do is the right attitude. And I teach the entrepreneurs that I work with, there's an expression you got to implant in your brain. The impossible just costs a little more. And it may not be money, it's you.
Effort.
And if somebody says can't, you tell them you don't understand that word,
I hear you.
because can't never did anything.
Is there anything you feel that we haven't discussed that should be added to the interview? Anything that we
Oh,
missed?
geez, there's so many little stories you can tell.
Right.
Some of them are
That depends
true,
on how
others
long
are
you,
dreams.
depends on how long you want to make this thing.
That's right. Well, you see, there's 6 volumes of every document I had in the Air Force.
Right. And I've
Yeah.
attached both of your summaries, the long one and the short
Yeah,
one.
the
to your-
14-pager.
Yeah, I've got it all on there, so anybody that wants to pull this and read it
Yeah.
can read it all. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure meeting you too.
Yeah. Thank you for your service and your sacrifice to our country. And
And Ed over there, I love his systems.
yeah, and I really enjoyed the interview.
Well,
Thank you,
thank you.
sir. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Well, same here.